3, 2, 1. Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'm the Director of Programs with NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, North Carolina. I'll be your host for the evening and I'm glad you're here. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building conversations and really building community on the topic of mental health. Our topic tonight specifically is gun violence and suicide. Mass shootings are a big problem clearly in the United States. During 2019, we had more than one per day. Thus, these tragic events really drive policy discussions, they drive talking points. However, surprise, they make up only 2% of actual gun deaths. One fact that is largely overlooked, nearly 2/3 of all gun deaths are actual suicides. That's about 60 lives taken per day. In addition, access to firearms increases the risk of suicide by 3 times. What are some common sense strategies that might help reduce these problems? Tonight's discussion will be looking at solutions and tools in the toolkit generated by a group called Moms Demand Action Against Gun Violence. More on that group in just a quick minute. As usual, the first part of our show will be an interview with me and our fabulous guests. About halfway through, we'll show our video of the week. And finally, we'll spend time answering your questions, members of our virtual studio audience. Just as long as you have questions in the Q&A box, we will be here responding to them. Now I want to pause and give credit to our sponsors. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Services Block Grant Fund. I say this every week, and it's true every week. We truly appreciate their guidance and support. Moving right along, Thursdays with NAMI is recorded, so if you have a friend who couldn't join us tonight, please let them know. It is never too late. They can be forgiven. Tonight's recording will be on our YouTube channel, NAMI North Carolina YouTube, within just a week or so. Now, without any further ado, I want to introduce our guests. Diana Gregory is a leader with the North Carolina chapters of Mom Demand Actions Against Gun Violence. She's led campaigns supporting local legislation in Holly Springs, for example, to prohibit the open carry of firearms in public buildings and in sensitive areas, for example, where children play. She also spearheaded Wear Orange Day to raise awareness in her area. I'm hoping that we'll have Gerald Givens join us. He's the president of the Raleigh-Apex National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He's also active on the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign Coordinating Committee and has a personal story to tell. So fingers crossed, we'll see him very soon. Debbie Weir is a senior executive on the nation's leading gun violence prevention organization. Again, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Debbie has more than 28 years of proven success. She's former CEO of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And now she's in her current position, making change and using that awesome skill set with Moms Take Action. Welcome, guests.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll jump right into our questions. And I know usually people have a personal story to tell or a professional story to tell about what brought you here with us tonight. Tell us your journey in whatever order you'd like.
Diana, is it all right if I start?
For some reason, we're not hearing you.
Oh.
There you go. That's better.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, Peg, so much for having us. And I'm excited to be on this tonight. It's such an important topic, and to be with Diana, who's one of our incredible volunteer leaders in Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I joined the organization almost 3 years ago, and what I didn't realize joining the organization when I thought about gun violence is that my family and I are gun violence survivors because my dad ended his life with a gun 11 years ago. And this is a picture that maybe you can see. I might be glared, but that was my dad, Don, and I. and that was 11 years ago. This was taken at my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, 6 weeks before he died. And, you know, at that time, we didn't know that he was struggling inside. I will say one thing about my father. He was a hard worker. He was a farmer his whole life. And when you look at the data on firearm suicide, the highest percentage of gun deaths are older rural white males. And my dad was one of those people that always took care of everybody else. And I think he had cancer. He was going through some treatments and he was doing better, but it was very frustrating for him that he couldn't climb up on the tractor and be out there every day. And I think in my mind, I think that he thought, I don't want everybody to take care of me because I take care of everybody else. That's my role in the family. And it's devastating. And it leaves a lot of questions, and it's been a lot for our family. By background, I'm a grief therapist, and I can tell you that professionally and personally, it doesn't always help. What I know are best practices and tips that can help when you're going through it personally. It doesn't always connect. So I'm grateful for our organization focusing on gun suicide and what we can do to prevent gun suicide. And I think my dad would be proud of the work that we are all doing on this. So that's my family story.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being vulnerable, Debbie. And I'm absolutely sure your father would be proud. I'm thrilled that you're here.
Thank you.
Diana?
Okay. Didn't know if I should wait or something. So I actually joined Moms a little over 3 years ago, I believe now. It feels like a lifetime. And I came obviously for Parkland and for Newtown, which I grew up on the border of Newtown in Bethel. Spent a lot of time in Newtown. But within Moms, I've done a couple different titles, and one of the best programs is the Be Smart. And one of the ones I wanted to actually do some more on was Be Smart for teenagers, because of especially in middle school, the mental taunting and especially with the hormonal changes too. It's a big time for children to make rash decisions. I mean, I have all girls, so they've had their hormonal highs and lows. We have had a male in our town get so frustrated because he didn't know what he was going to do for the rest of his life and got his father's gun and died that way. And then there's been other different suicides. But if people can learn to look out for the different personality changes, if their grades are dropping, there's a whole list of different factors to pay attention to. It would help more kids. And if there is a gun in the house and the child is in a downward trend, it's something that could be, their life could be taken in like 1 second compared to doing an overdose, which can be brought to the hospital or something. This is a permanent decision. And I don't want that to happen to any other. So I have a lot of information I can send if anybody wants some more information. This was a Be Smart from 2015, which is a great PDF on teen suicide warnings. So if anybody wants that information, I can scan it over as well.
Sure. Usually people are really excited to get additional information.
Okay.
We do ask folks to register, so we have their email addresses. We don't use them for any other purpose, but if we can share additional resources on the topic they've expressed interest in, we will do that. Okay. And I noticed I explored the Moms Demand Action website before this evening, and I didn't quite realize, as you mentioned, with guns, it's a permanent decision to a problem that might have been resolved over time.
Right.
I didn't realize that so many people who make an attempt actually go on and, they move past that. They're absolutely fine. There are so many attempts made and people recover fully, and it's a wonderful thing. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area. Personally, I don't know. I haven't lost anyone to suicide in that particular way, but I have had that type of loss. So Gerald Givens, I'm thrilled that you're here, and your timing is perfect. We're introducing ourselves and telling our stories in a nutshell of how you came to be involved with Moms Demand Action and this issue.
Well, good evening, everybody. I apologize for being late. I was out there doing early voting as a poll worker today, and so it was absolutely amazing. I was shocked at how many people were out there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was a steady line of people till this evening. I got involved with Moms Demand Action pretty much centered around the gun violence issue. I've lost 6 family members to gun violence in my lifetime. My grandfather, my uncle, my brother, and 3 cousins. My cousin Tony was just killed last spring. And so to me, there is no other bigger issue right now than public safety. Mm-hmm. And so it's a big issue for me. And I also served 20 years in the United States Air Force. And being in the military, that I have some experience in folks attempting and actually committing suicide. And so I hope to share some of the stories and some of my experiences today in our conversation.
Well, thank you for your service to our country. 6 people, you've lost 6 people to gun violence, family members, no less. That is a truly astounding number.
Yes, all of them males. And so it's something that's priority number 1 for me. If we don't have safety, we don't have freedom.
Right. Right. So our next question is, there's so much to explore here. Tell us about Moms Demand Action Against Gun Violence. How did the organization start? What are they about?
I'll start, and then if Diana, if you have anything to add. So Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America actually started by a stay-at-home mom in Indiana, Shannon Watts, the day that the Sandy Hook school shootings massacre occurred. And she was at home, and I think everybody in America that day, but especially parents, were like, how's that fathomable that your first graders go to school, or your spouse who's a teacher, a principal, go to school, and that this could happen in America. And Shannon was reaching out to other moms on her Facebook page and started Moms Demand Action on a Facebook page, which has now grown from 75 friends that she had on a Facebook page to over 6.5 million supporters. We have over 100,000 active volunteers. And at that time, I was working at Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and Shannon actually called the MAD National Helpline, and I was volunteering on the helpline and answered her call, and she said, is there a MAD on gun violence prevention? And I said, I don't know, let's do some research. And at that time, there were a lot of local groups working on gun violence prevention. There was obviously the Brady campaign working on policy, but Brady campaign doesn't really have volunteers on the ground, like this army of volunteers on the ground. And so she started it. One person who really cared started it, and others joining. And we now have chapters of volunteers in all 50 states, in the District of Columbia, and groups. So in North Carolina, Diana, how many groups of Moms Demand Action do we have in North Carolina?
Oh my gosh, I have to go back and look at that. I apologize. I used to know that offhand.
Yeah, and I will say we practically tripled in size after Parkland. And this is one thing that we realize, and Peg, you said this in the beginning about mass shootings. It seems that people pay very much attention when mass shootings happen, whether it's school or Las Vegas or Parkland, Santa Fe High School in Texas. But what we try to do is, as we are growing, it's our responsibility to bring it back to gun violence that happens every single day, right? Whether it is homicides or whether it's gun suicides and unintentional shootings, when children get a hold of their parents' handgun that's in the bedside table and it's not locked up and they think it's a toy. And this is Domestic Violence Month. And so if you look at the intersection of gun violence and domestic violence, there's such an intersection there. And so that's how Moms Demand Action started. We then merged with Mayors Against Illegal Guns that Michael Bloomberg had started when he was mayor of New York. So with Mayors Against Illegal Guns and Moms Demand Action merging together, that formed Everytown for Gun Safety. So we're all one organization.
Okay, so you put moms and mayors together and you have a formidable force. That makes perfect sense to me.
And now we have students too. So we have Students Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and we have over 450 student groups, high school, community, and college throughout the country. And they have just registered over 100,000 new voters.
I was at the farmer's market in Raleigh like 2 weeks ago, and these people kept walking up to me with the vote thing and asking me if I voted. I'm like, I've already done it. And then I realized it was a local Students Demand Action group. They must have been college kids, but they did a fantastic job. They were walking up to everybody.
Yeah.
But I love the blue vote face mask.
Yeah.
It stands out. It's nice.
Well, thank you.
Still gives me chills every time you say Newtown.
Right, right. Newtown, Parkland, Florida, as Debbie mentioned, there's so many tragedies that have hit schools and hit children, and hopefully the amazing response of these student activists will give us the momentum we need, because we do have our work cut out for us in this area. Diana, Gerald, would you like to add anything to your local experience with Moms Demand Action? Or
Man, these guys here in North Carolina are fantastic. It doesn't matter. Rain, shine, no matter what, how big the task is, how small it is, they show up and they make it happen. And that's what I appreciate about them. They understand, the importance of working together as a team, and also delivering a message to our community that this is behavior that we're choosing to live like this. And we don't have to live like this.
They will call it out.
And they call it out. And I really appreciate about them so much.
Gerald's very good with the kids. We did something with March for Our Lives right around the same time as Parkland stuff, and we actually rented a van, and he drove to all these cities. I met him down in Wilmington and stuff, so he's very involved. And the students, they're drawn to you.
Yeah.
They came up and they said they wanted a van to travel around, and we donated the van, and they said they needed a driver. I donated myself to be a driver.
It was filled with junk through the whole back.
And we drove like almost 1,000 miles across North Carolina, and they were registering voters, holding voter education, bringing their generation together to get involved about the issues that they care about.
You just met some of the Newtown kids that are now grown up in Washington, D.C. recently.
Man, that was a heartwarming. Because, we were sitting there, and I think there was a little girl from Washington, D.C. who was telling her story about dealing with gun violence. And then you could see the kids from Newtown reliving their trauma. And after the young lady was finished speaking and the event was over with, I just grabbed as many of them as I could and put them in my arms and gave them like a 2-minute motivational speech. And a couple of days later, I received a picture from a photojournalist who saw that. And now, I got that picture in my office, in my NAACP office, and it's one of my favorite pictures of all time.
Papa Gerald.
And so
it's just amazing.
When did you say the tour was?
It was with a tour that they did in
October,
North Carolina. They did a tour all around North Carolina, and they were registering voters. They were holding education functions. It was just several things in several different cities, and about 1,000 miles, and it was awesome. I got a chance to listen to their music. And it was
it was right after the hurricanes, because they did some volunteer work down in Wilmington.
Absolutely. They even volunteered. They did. Yeah, you're absolutely right. They did. They volunteered. They sorted donations, and they actually filled a truck full of goods to be delivered.
Well, I have to say, as you're speaking, it strikes me that this is such a tragic topic we're on, but in addressing it and pulling people together, you've had some uplifting moments. And I think that's so important to keep movement and momentum going and to fill people's cup. It's hard work that you're doing, but it can be so fulfilling too.
Well,
Yeah,
it's almost, if you, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Gerald.
on that wall you see behind me, that's my military life there. And you guys can't even imagine some of the days that I had in my 20 years of service in uniform. And the things that a lot of people stress out about, I don't, because I know that it can be really, really bad. And
Yeah.
so the days that I got left here on this planet, nobody's going to take my joy, no matter how bad the situation is.
Yeah. And Peg, I was just going to say, working for so many years at Mothers Against Drunk Driving with, victims of drunk driving and drug driving, and now working on gun violence, it's what fills me up when those that have been victims and survivors of these preventable traumatic tragedies, the fact that you can get out of the bed every morning and then you want to make a difference. And for those of our volunteers and community partners like the NAACP, for those that maybe they haven't had that personal experience, but they care about their neighbors and they care about their community, especially during the pandemic. And this is pretty extraordinary that during the pandemic, it's very unfortunate to see the rise and increase tremendously on how many guns have been sold. Then people are isolated, quarantining at home, which can cause depression and anxiety. Everybody is, at home to be healthy and safe. So there's more risk for depression. There may be more people experiencing suicide ideation, or those that may have more domestic violence occurrences happen. But that our volunteers and working with our community partners, if we look at all of our engagements for 2020 to compare to 2019, we've surpassed what we did in 2019, and we're doing it virtually and we're doing it from home. So that's what fills me up. And I would say, Gerald, you just mentioned that you've had 6 loved ones that you care about that have died by gun violence. And look at you, you're motivated, you want to do more. And that gives me hope. That gives me hope that we actually are going to be able to prevent this and save lives.
And I'll share with you that I've had a chance to see something different. I lived in Japan where gun violence is basically eradicated, and I've lived in England where it's rare. So I know that this is cultural. Yeah. This is a choice. We don't have to live like this. And I have a daughter that lives in Australia right now. Yep. And they had their last mass shooting almost 30 years ago. Right. And every time something happens here in the United States, her friends in Australia say, "What is wrong with America?"
My cousin in Australia, New Zealand, every day something happens, they're constantly sending me messages. I'm not sure what's happening. Even in Holland, the Dutch ones too.
Yeah. Peg, if it's okay, I'm going to put a link in the chat box. With Everytown for Gun Safety, we have a section of our website that's called Every Stat, and you can go state by state and see what the data in your state is. And I'm looking at it right now for North Carolina. So in North Carolina, 60% of all the deaths by gun are suicide. And then you have your homicide and unintentional shootings that are in there. And when you think about suicide as well, 90% of all suicides attempted by a gun are fatal.
Right.
Versus if you look at other means, it's about 4%. And I remember when my dad died by gun suicide, the next day, the first question my mother asked was, "Do you think he was depressed?" And I said, "Mom, I don't think anybody ends their life that is not depressed." And she said, "Why didn't we know it?" And I said, "Daddy masked it really well." And, And so, you know, those are hard questions for survivors of suicide to answer and ponder and try to figure out. And so anyway, I'll put this because it's really interesting to see where the data is, but particularly in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, and you're welcome to share your screen if you want to give us a quick tour. That would be fine.
Oh, wow. Now you're asking me something that I'm not really Diana, do you know how to do
Right on
that?
the bottom. I'm pulling it
You
on
know-
my other. What's the percentage you said when you were talking about your father about the of white men and
It's about 35 to 40% of all gun suicides are older rural white males. That is the data on
I think we should pay attention to
Yeah.
people that are getting
Yeah.
laid off now and who have been employed for such a long time too.
Yeah.
That might fall in that category.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that, you know, the reality that we're living with, that it's suicide for older white males and it's homicide for younger black males.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
And it's just, but the common denominator is a gun.
That's right.
Wow, Gerald, I have never heard it put that way. That is powerful and disheartening on so many levels. Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective. That's big stuff.
Yeah,
A lot of
you know,
names here.
yeah, you know, I you know, whenever I hear the word suicide, I have to think of my buddy. His name was Pat Gonzalo. Pat was the airman's airman. His boots was the shiniest. His uniform was the sharpest. He's the first one in and he's the last one out. And this is somebody who I work next to, I mean, feet away from each other every single day. And he came in to work one Friday and he gave me a hug and he said, "Hey, you be good and, you know, stay out of trouble." And I looked at him like, man, what trouble am I gonna get into, you know? But I gave him a hug, gave him 5, and he went on out the door. That weekend, he went to every one of his friends that he promised something to, and he accomplished it. And then Monday morning, I was sitting at my desk, and one of the sergeants came in, and he said, "Givens, Gonzalo just shot himself at his desk." And I was like, "Man, don't play like that, man. That's not cool to play like that." He said, "No, Givens, I'm serious." So I grabbed my hat and I walked over to the building where he was because he had moved over to another division. And I got there and my first sergeant said, "Givens, guard the back door. Don't let anyone in." And when he said that to me, my heart just sunk. And what happened was my buddy Pat had served 26 years in the Air Force. And in the Air Force, we have something called higher tenure, that when you reach a certain rank, you can only serve so many years in that rank. And he was a master sergeant. And I think at that time, you could only serve 26 years in the Air Force at that time. And he was being forced to retire. And he couldn't see living his life any other way. And he took his life. And it was heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And no one never saw that coming.
Wow. That is very heartbreaking, and I'm so sorry that happened. It also speaks volumes to connection to others as opposed to isolation. It seems like that's a huge determining factor with folks who are having suicidal ideation or making attempts.
Yeah. And, you know, on the veteran suicide data, if you look at that, I mean, on average, about 4,200 veterans die by firearms suicide every year. That's 11 veterans per day. So if you look around, 60 people per day die by firearms suicide, 11 are veterans.
And Debbie, I'll tell you that I had success with walking people back from suicide.
Sure.
So that's what made Pat committing suicide worse.
Yeah.
Because I was able to save other people, but I couldn't save somebody that was right next to me every day.
Right. But you know, we're not mind readers, right? I mean, I just know when with my experience with my dad, it took me a long time to understand we can't read minds. You know, if there can be times, and I'll use my father as an example, where there were no overt signs that we thought. I mean, there wasn't anything. And those wouldas, couldas, shouldas, that can just really wear on you, right? And I'm all about just give yourself permission and don't take that on, because you're not going to come up with an answer that is satisfying to you. So, yeah. You know, I would love to say, Peg, just so people understand the work that we do and the work that we do with community partners like the NAACP and other groups, especially if we look at homicides and city gun violence, where it really is communities of color that are disproportionately impacted. And that's not what you see that hits the news every day, right? As an organization, again, we're not against gun owners. We're not against legally, you know, owning guns, but we believe that if you're a gun owner, you have a responsibility to be a safe and responsible gun owner. And that means, you know, that you lock up your gun at always, and no one can have access to it. And there's so many things that can be done that don't take away the right to own a gun, but limiting access. So some states, we have, I think 22 states now that have passed emergency risk protection order laws. North Carolina is not one of them. I will say states that are more red in the South and the Midwest, it's very challenging to get these laws passed. But like Virginia passed it because we were able to flip the House and the governor. But you know, that says if a loved one thinks their loved one is at risk, they're in crisis, or that they could hurt themselves, that you temporarily remove the gun for now, not forever, for now, so that that person could get help. And we believe that that really does save lives. And it's a tool that family members can use. And so that's legislatively and advocacy, something that we're really focused on.
You know,
well, you went right ahead and answered my question, Debbie. So thank you. It was, you really brought up a big red flag when you mentioned that gun sales are increasing while we have all this isolation and lockdown. Social distancing going on. And so yeah, I'm so glad that you're telling me about some of the tools and policies and suggestions. Any other thoughts about what we can do in response to this situation?
What I've done here, what I've done here is, and especially during this time when we're having this discussion about policing, is I've actually become closer to every law enforcement agency in my jurisdiction. I speak regularly to those police chiefs. Those areas where we identify where there is the suicide, where there is the homicide in our communities, I want to address it. I mean, I'm planning a meeting right now with our police chief and some others who are very concerned about the radius in their neighborhood. That's the type of conversation we have to have. I can identify, growing up in Detroit, Michigan, when people they weren't paying attention to my neighborhood when I was growing up. I grew up in one of those neighborhoods where they had the unlimited access to firearms and heroin. I grew up on the west side of Detroit. There were days we couldn't go to school because there were so many gunfights. We would just miss school for days on end. But no one was paying attention back then. Man, when I started seeing these kids protesting, demonstrating, speaking up, standing up, I was like, yo, I'm gonna support them because no one was there for us. And so I'm proud of them, and I'm proud of organizations like Moms because, I know how my mother felt when my brother in 1997, New Year's Day, my brother was shot and killed on New Year's Day in 1997. And I when I couldn't stand when I walked away from my brother's casket. And it finally took years, like I think it was like maybe my mother, it was like the 10th anniversary of my brother passing, because my birthday is on December 10th, and my brother that was killed, his birthday was on December 15th, and then my baby brother's birthday is December 24th. And so on the 10-year anniversary, I knew that my mother was going to be thinking about my brother. And so I just threw this big, huge Christmas bash at my house to try to make everybody just celebrate and things like that. The pain that a mother feels, it never goes away. Even though that was my brother, the pain that my mother felt, it was nothing like the pain I felt. And I saw my mother live with that. And I know that's what these mothers and moms demand action. They said it in so many different events, and when speaking about their children and how they felt about it, you hear it. It's real. And I think that, we have an opportunity now where the kids are being impacted by this, that when you see that, and I'm saying, and I'm going to say this being real. Can I be real in this conversation? I'm going to be real.
I support that.
Racism, the two greatest problems racism has created is gun violence and extremism. Mm-hmm. Those are the two greatest products of racism. Because, and I'm going to show you how that's true. We all saw what happened at Sandy Hook to babies, and nothing changed.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. Gerald, what was your brother's name?
My brother's name was Laval. He looked like Michael Jordan. That's what he looked like. He looked like Michael Jordan.
He was tall.
He was very tall. As a matter of fact, I was the shortest one out of all of my brothers and sisters. Even my children are taller than me. I told them that I blame it on my mother and father back in the 70s having those special brownies. Y'all know what I'm talking about.
All that you do, Gerald, honors Laval. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Laval? And I will say a practice that we do at Moms Demand Action too is, we can look at data and statistics and okay, but these are people's lives. And when you think about how many people die by gun violence, how many loved ones are left behind? And let's say Laval's name out loud so that we remember he's a person that should still be living his life being Michael Jordan right now. So
exactly. No matter how many times I blocked this shot as a kid.
So let's say Laval's name out loud.
Laval.
Thank you for what you do, Gerald.
Thank you. I love that. I love that we did that, Debbie. That's a perfect way to honor someone. And Gerald, I really appreciate your comment, and you're telling us how you helped your mother to cope with a really difficult anniversary, the 10-year anniversary of the death. And that's something we can do, is be aware of what someone's going through. And, to the extent that we know them and are able to anticipate their needs. They're not mind readers, but sometimes it's harder to ask. And if someone makes an offer, as you did so graciously, that helps so much.
Yeah.
We try to reach out to our local survivors because we know when the dates are coming close and stuff, and just try to just be there and say their name.
Yeah.
Mm.
Peg, are you okay if I comment on one of the comments in our chat box there?
Please.
It says, I don't know how to think about like gun violence, that nothing has changed since Sandy Hook. Let me just say a lot has changed since Sandy Hook. Not as much as we would want, right? And I would also say that federally, it's not getting done the way that we want it done. And it hasn't, we don't have a bipartisan Congress that works together. You know, it's interesting in 2018 when the House flipped to Democrats, the first 100 days they passed a background check bill, they passed a ERPA red flag law, right? And the Senate has yet to even have a hearing on anything. So we can't count on federal at this point unless things change. But at the state level, and I'll give an example, in Virginia, in 2018, their House and Senate and their governor right now are all Democrat, which they are gun sense candidate, legislative champions. And once they did that, they passed 6 laws that are gun violence prevention laws, including the extreme risk protection order law, which helps those to temporarily remove a firearm for now when someone's in crisis. And so, you know, and even after Parkland, 7 states passed that ERPA law, including 2 states that had Republican governors, and that was the governor of Maryland, Governor Hogan, and the governor of Vermont. So statewide, a lot of states are getting it done. It can be frustrating in a state like North Carolina that tends to be more on the conservative side where it's a challenge, but we are making some progress. We're not making enough progress to be satisfied, but there is some good progress being made. But
yeah, and that's true, and that is true. There is some progress that's being made, but I always want us all to keep in mind something that I learned early in my military career, that culture eats policy for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have really got some more work to do on the cultural side, but we can keep making these steps, right, that we're making, you know, because we need those steps to take place. I can tell you, as an African American, I know that when the Civil Rights Bill was passed, it helped my life. So yeah, I know that these policies and legislations help, but we got so much work to do when it comes to our culture.
Yeah, we do. And, you know, I think it is, and when Diana talked about be smart for our volunteers and for us, it's let's get in front of as many gun owners as possible and demystify that we're against the Second Amendment. We're trying to take your guns away from you. That's not what we're about. We are about be a responsible gun owner. 90% of Americans are in favor of background checks on all gun sales. Republicans, conservatives, and so, but you know, the NRA does a really good job of building, like, these people are trying to take your guns away from you, right? And we have to be in front of people and have conversations, and that's how MAD did it, right? Like, a lot of people thought MAD was a bunch of prohibitionists and were against drinking. We were about don't drink and drive. That's the safest choice. Designate a driver. And that culture change takes time, but we really do. You're right, Gerald. Culture change is a big piece of this.
We have to keep continuing to correct the facts.
That's right.
Back. Yeah.
That's true.
That's one of the cool things we did last year was we had a meeting. We had a Facebook Live conversation with the African American Gun Owners Association, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
And they were shocked, you know, that the NAACP would participate in that type of a conversation, you know, along with law enforcement officers, clergy, and gun owners. And, you know, I was keeping the conversation about gun safety. It wasn't about trying to take your guns away. It was saying, if you're going to own a gun, be responsible. Right. That when I was in the military, I had to know the law of armed conflict, rules of engagement, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, proportional response. I can go with 9 or 10 other different doctrines, before I even thought to remove my gun from a holster.
Right.
But somebody here in our country, they don't have to know anything and just go fill out an application and be qualified to go purchase a gun. That doesn't make sense.
I mean, do you remember the two people, the husband and wife, in like that $1 million house? Was it Kentucky or Missouri?
Oh, no, that was Missouri.
Oh
that
my God. That lady was flailing around a gun like she's never had one in her life and had a license for that gun. I was like mortified.
That was so
exactly.
That really was.
Exactly. And I had to qualify on my weapon every single year. And I had to be able to break that weapon down. I had to be able to understand it. I had to respect it and understand that this thing can take somebody's life.
Right.
And if they saw that I couldn't respect that weapon with taking it apart and putting it back together, and I never would have got a chance to get on the firing range.
Right.
And here we are. We make our military so responsible, but the citizens, hey, just if you want one, get one. That makes no sense at all.
That's an excellent point, and I want to take a break real quickly. I can tell there's a lot of passion here, and I love that passion. We've also got some really interesting comments in the chat box. A gentleman from Chicago who talked about criminals getting guns from across state lines. So I want to follow up on all that. And if you have a question or a statement you'd like us to respond to, please type it in the Q&A box. In the chat box, it will scroll away, and I may not see it. If you put it in the Q&A box, the panelists will get to it. But this is where we turn to our video of the week. And before I show that, I want to real quick thank Gail Pruitt, our psychiatric nurse volunteer, and Angel, who's on our chat box this evening answering questions and typing in links. Also our tech guru intern, Eddie Simmons, who is always helping out behind the scenes to help us have a smooth program. And of course, our panelists. Thank you for being here and sharing your stories and your expertise. Now for our video of the week. Your comments, Gerald, that about culture, eating policy for lunch, this really strikes me with this particular video that we're going to show. It's very brief, and I have to say, it really made me laugh. I watched it several times, but it speaks to how casual our culture has become about guns. So let's go ahead and have a look at this.
Another tip to gun safety is always keep your gun on safety when you're not ready to fire. Well, son of a bitch.
Okay.
That's a perfect example.
Is it more funny or sad?
Shocking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, responses?
Classic example. It's a classic example. Here he is talking about gun safety and putting your weapon on safety, and this guy trips and his gun goes off. That is not safe at all.
You know, and I would say too, if you want to drive a vehicle in America, you have to pass a test.
Yes.
You have to get a license.
3 levels.
And, you know, a vehicle is a 2,000-pound potential weapon, can hurt and kill people. And we do not have the same requirements with.
You got to pass the LSAT to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Peg, I think it's important too just to talk about when we're thinking about suicide, prevention of suicide, really is the lack of resources for mental health services for people that really need it. You know, because I think obviously if someone attempts or does end their life by any means, there are issues with depression and mental health issues, and there really is a lack of services that are available for folks. So I just wanted to be sure to say that as well.
And I think, Deb, that was an excellent point, because I want to show you something. This is my caseload right now. I don't know if you can see it. Hold on. I don't know if it's letting me do it or not. It's not coming in there right. But
It's
anyway,
looking pretty
I
light
got,
there,
I
Gerald.
know it's like
I got it. I know it's got to look like the Matrix, but hey, let's put it this way. 16 of the 17 phone calls that we got last week to our NAACP branch were about women who were dealing with discrimination in their workplace.
Mm.
And one of those ladies, it got her to the point that where she got sick.
Oh, no.
I mean, physically sick. And as an NAACP president, I have to think about our customers' mental state. There's been times when I've actually had to pick up the phone and call for a welfare check on someone.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you were responsible enough to do that. It's an awkward, I've done the same thing, and it's, you know, you're upsetting someone probably. They might be mad at you, but it's really important if someone's not in a safe situation that we get them checked out. And to Debbie's point on the capacity and how difficult it can be to get help when you want it, that's our bread and butter at NAMI. We focus on policy, we focus on capacity issues, and that's always there. It's always in place. If we were to ask people to wait several months to see a doctor about a heart condition, that would never be acceptable, or diabetes. But if it's a child looking for a psychiatrist, that's pretty typical. Yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done on all fronts.
I tell people all the time, I was about 36 years old, and I was working at the Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Agency. A lot of times I was the only Black man in the room. I had 2 great kids, beautiful wife, beautiful home. I had this whole, but I was stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go to the doctor. I had to sit down and explain to somebody, this is what's going on with me, and I'm stressed out. And I can tell you, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Being able to sit down and have a doctor talk to me just about the things that I was going through in my life, and to help guide me onto a path of healthiness, of trying to be happy for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, it was important. And I tell all of my friends, if you feel that you are too stressed, you feel like you're going through depression, you feel like you don't have anybody in the world to talk to, that's not true. Go get help. We have doctors for that. If you have a toothache, you're going to the dentist. If you can't see, you're going to an optometrist. When you just feel bad, you need to go to see a mental health professional.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And for some reason, it's so easy to understand every other organ of the body might have trouble, but the brain, it seems like we want to put it in its own category. So there's a lot of stigma, a lot of barriers to overcome, but that's why we're here having these conversations every day, to demystify, to let people know it's okay not to be okay.
And we had to change our culture in the intelligence agency, because if you went to a mental health specialist, they would take your security clearance from you. And so airmen were bottling up things, and then they started committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the military, what happens is when, is 1 happen, then it's 3, then it's 9. It just multiplies.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to get a handle on it. And what we found out in intelligence when we went through our cycle, where it was maybe like 13, maybe 14 suicides that happened like back to back.
Wow.
We had to just shut down.
Yeah. Yeah. And the veteran community and the military community has its own special set of barriers with stigma. And is my career going to be at risk? We could do a whole show on that. And perhaps we should. We've got some comments in the Q&A box. I think this is a comment looking for a response. Do you believe people get a gun just because they need more guns. Sort of no reason at all. It's a trendy thing to collect is how I'm reading that. That's from our friend Vicki Hill. Any thoughts on that, panelists?
You know, I have a lot of pair of shoes. I like shoes. You know, there is no law that limits the amount of guns. I think the Constitution definitely protects that. I can say, you know, for my dad, for example, he was a 5th generation farmer. He had about 10 shotguns that were passed down through the generations from great-grandfather and all. And for me, it's about those guns should be properly locked up so nobody can get access to them regardless of how many there is. So I don't know, Diana, what else would you add to that?
Oh, well, I was just going to say our government is pretty blatant on Twitter, telling people the constant comments about 2A or get ready for this or get ready for that. And I think it encourages people to go stock up and stand in those long lines. And I think there's a lot of messages that are coming, not just from him, but across social media.
Yeah.
And just people are scared.
Yeah.
And it's
I'm
also a sign
telling
of
you.
power. It's a power thing for people too. I mean, we look at the people who had in Raleigh, 6 months ago, maybe longer now, in front of the subway. Gerald, you know about that one?
Yeah, yeah, but it was a great way. We had the situation here where there were a group of men who were walking around downtown Raleigh with a mixture of real firearms and fake firearms and some of it looked like it was heavy military equipment.
Right.
That was usable. But I guess our law enforcement agencies were able to determine that those weapons were not usable and that some of them were fake. So they just let them parade around downtown without causing an incident or overreacting, but just making sure that they didn't,
there's huge
cross any
intimidation.
lines.
And huge
Right.
intimidation for people.
And so then these guys go and they intimidate an This was Mother's Day weekend, right?
Yeah.
They intimidate an African-American couple that are enjoying Mother's Day weekend. Then they went into one of the local Subway restaurants and they intimidated the Subway workers because they couldn't determine whether or not if those were real weapons or not. And they ate in the restaurant during COVID-19 when no one was supposed to be eating in the restaurant, and the employee told them that they couldn't, and they did it anyway. So I got on the phone. I called Diana. I called Tony. I called everybody. I'm like, no, this is not going to happen in our neighborhood. They can't come here and act like this. And we didn't have one protest. We didn't have one demonstration. From our homes, we made phone calls, we wrote letters, we put together petitions, we got our elected officials engaged and involved. And the next thing you know, Subway changed its policies for all 22,000 subways across the nation. And we did all of that from right at home.
And Tony brought him the no guns allowed sticker to him. I forgot.
Yeah, Tony sure did.
Yeah, the owner of Subway. I forgot his name right now, but yeah.
And then we found out weeks later that the guy who was one of the leaders in that group, he ended up getting arrested for trying to sell weapons to Hamas.
Wow, this is quite a story, and I'm so glad you made that change. I do want to give a shout out to Tony Cope, who's a member of Moms Demand Action, who pulled this evening together and introduced all of us, who you just mentioned. So just to pull everyone onto the same page. We've also got another question in the Q&A box. And it's about why do you have access to a gun and what policies should be changed regarding approval and licensing. Any thoughts about that?
Well,
I spoke to this earlier a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that we definitely support and advocate for background checks on all gun sales. We also, if you think about those that could be in crisis, We also have supported laws that have like a 2 to 3 day waiting period before you can purchase a gun. And I want to share briefly a story of a bereaved mom in Maryland. And she shared with me, and she testifies about this, but she had a 18-year-old son who his girlfriend had broke up with him, like his first love. He was very distraught. And she was worried about him, and they were trying to get him counseling services. She didn't think he was like in an acute crisis. Mm-hmm. And so he had a counseling appointment for like 5 days later. Well, before that time, he went to a gun store, bought a gun, and within a half hour ended his life. Mm. And she said, you know, if you think about like a 2-day, 3-day waiting period, he could have been at a totally different place in 2 days or 3 days, right? So that is something that we also support. And I think it's also interesting, and Peg, I'd be interested to hear from you on NAMI's positions on this, but there's a real difference between like you have a diagnosed mental illness versus you're having mental health challenges, right? And not everyone who, first of all, not everybody that commits crimes with guns are mentally ill. Most are not mentally ill. But I would say those that oppose what we're trying to do is say, well, that is a mental illness problem, and that is not what the problem is. It is easy access, easy purchasing. You can buy, if you buy a gun in America from a licensed dealer, it requires a background check. If you go to the Craigslist of arms sales, arms list, you can buy a gun and go in a parking lot with somebody and here's the money for it, and there's the gun without a background check. So, so background checks are critically important.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. That's there is a real muddying of the waters when people are responding to a mass shooting. And I would love to see more attention paid to an individual's history of violent behavior versus their mental health status.
Yeah.
Because 1 in 5 people in the United States in any given year are having symptoms of a mental health condition. We are more likely, folks with mental health challenges, to be victimized. And the violence correlation comes in for a tiny percentage if I'm someone who has a severe mental illness that has psychotic features, and psychosis has to do with hallucinations, delusions, where my illness causes me to lose some touch with reality. It's just hard for me to distinguish, is the voice on the radio or is the voice generated by my illness? And so, you know, maybe I think a Nazi is chasing me. I think I'm defending someone. I had a friend whose sister punched her in the face literally because she thought Satan was attacking her face. Mm-hmm. So there is that tiny sliver of a percentage where the violence can be more likely, but the vast percentage of folks with a mental health condition are no more likely than the average bear to have violent tendencies. And I think the impact of that sort of policy would be people don't want to get help, men in particular. You know, I want to keep my guns. I'm not going to go to a counselor.
Yeah. Diana, I think you were going to say something else as well.
Oh, I forgot, but I'm just keep thinking of PTSD with the veterans and stuff from that one lady that was, I think it was the Iraq war she was in, that would have blackouts and stuff. That just keeps coming up, the PTSD part of the mental health. I forgot what I was saying before. Sorry.
You know, and I was going to follow up behind Peg and say that, you know, as African-American men or boys, we grow up, a lot of us spend our life in survival mode.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up on the block that I grew up in Detroit. I am the only one that grew up to become a man, to include my baby brother. Yeah. I'm the only one out of all the boys that I played with. I'm the only one that grew up to become a man. And it goes back to what Debbie's point was, access. Mm-hmm. We just had access to the guns in our neighborhoods. The reality was that the people don't want to hear the truth, but there were trains that would just show up in our neighborhood, and there were just guns in those trains with ammunition, or it would be a car or a van with those guns and that ammunition, and we had access to it, and it just made life horrible. I'll never forget being at a basketball game, and a shooting broke out at a basketball game, and I had my girlfriend. I was like a freshman in high school, and I had my girlfriend, and I'm guiding her to safety in the middle of a gunfight at 15 years old.
Wow.
That's now I remember what I was going to say with the access to guns. Several years ago, I was talking to one of the police chiefs. We were tabling for Teen Day, I think it was in Fuquay, and she was telling me about a gun store that is in downtown Fuquay, and they did some sort of audit of it, and like 300 weapons were missing. So they were just declared weapons missing. They didn't know where they were and stuff, and so those are just illegally on the street, and no tracking of those weapons. They can only do, I forgot, there's a huge limitation on them. I think it's like parts or something they sell now, but 300 guns, just, you know, like Gerald said, readily on the street and access to people that should not have them.
Right. And then to go back to Debbie's point about access to care,
Yeah.
if I'm someone who lives in the inner city or in a rural area, access to guns, very easy. Access to drugs, mood-altering substances, very easy. Access to care, culturally competent, relevant, really good mental health care, not easy.
Not even.
And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. In the United States of America, where we have the highest quality of life. I can tell y'all, I went on a special operations mission where I had to eat what they call MREs. Y'all know if y'all heard of MREs before.
No.
Where I had to, where it's dehydrated food that we heat up. It's like it's incredible. It's dehydrated peaches, dehydrated this, dehydrated that. Right. I had to eat it for like a week. Right. And y'all, I got into the United States, and I kissed the ground. When I got home, I was happy to be here because we got such great quality of life. But within 2 hours of being in Baltimore, constant police sirens, constant ambulances, 7, 8 people have been shot that night.
Mm.
If you really take a look at all the numbers of gun violence in our country for, I think, the past 30 years, I believe that it will total up to more people have died from gun violence in the United States than all the wars.
I believe it.
It doesn't make sense.
Mm.
And when we talk about the issue of suicide, this is people who we love, right? That are in great pain. And that's what I felt about my buddy Pat. I just wish that Pat would have just talked to me.
Yeah.
And just shared with me what he was going through. And I could have explained to him that his boss, John, was going to retire and let him take his civilian job. That was supposed to have been a surprise to him.
Oh.
You know, I would have let him know that was going to happen if he would have came to me and said how he was feeling. I think that, you know, we just, especially, you know, as Debbie pointed out, that statistic of men committing suicide at a higher rate, you know, I mean, it's okay to cry.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to say, I don't feel good. You know, I cry now more. It's easier for me to cry now after my grandfather passed away, he was my hero.
Mm.
And after that, it made it easier for me to cry after that, because I cried like a 2-year-old baby at my grandfather's funeral. But as men, we're not perfect. We're human just like everybody else is. We have good days, we have bad days. And talk about it. You know, don't hold it in.
Mm.
You know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, it goes back to culture. There's so many avenues that we could explore here, and I'd love to have you all back and get into some of these. I want to get to a couple of these questions in the Q&A box. And this was brought up earlier, an acronym ERPO. Can you all explain ERPO laws and how they help prevent gun suicides as well as other gun violence? That's from Tony.
Yeah. ERPO laws, extreme risk protection order laws, allow a family member, if you feel, or loved one, if you feel like your loved one's in crisis and could either harm themselves or harm others, either someone who is suicidal or could be homicidal, to work with law enforcement to get a protective order to remove the firearm or firearms for the home for now. And again, so that that person could get the emergency counseling services that they would need. There are the states that have passed it. You can go to everytown.org and see which states have passed it. Again, North Carolina has not. Virginia has, for example. Florida passed it after the Parkland High School shootings. Because the shooter in Parkland, there had been many reports that that student was having some issues, was in some crises, and he really fell through the cracks of anybody really doing anything about it. And then he had easy access to a gun for the home that he lived in. And so every state does it a little bit differently. So whichever states have passed that law, there's a website that you can go to called onethingyoucando.org, and it will have the states that have passed that legislation and how a family member could work with law enforcement to access that ability.
It's not just suicides, like Debbie was saying. I mean, it's domestic violence.
Yeah.
And another family can bring it up about their, their son and concern for the wife and the children living in the house. So
I think storage is just such a huge issue. I think it is a huge issue. When on a military base, at least in the Air Force, if you own a firearm, you have to keep your firearm at the range. You have to go check it out.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't turn it back in, you better believe someone's going to be knocking at your door asking you where that firearm is. I think storage is just, we need to rethink about storage in our country of our firearms. I understand that, when they wrote the Second Amendment back then, and, we could talk about that issue as well, and even how race played a part of that. I can understand, how they were back then.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where we are now in 2020, where you can go to a country concert in Las Vegas and someone can, from a high-rise hotel, shoot over 700 rounds in minutes. We're not in 1776. We're in 2020, and we have to adapt and act like we're living in that type of time with the technology that we have. One of the greatest quotes that I think from Dr. King, I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to paraphrase it. But Dr. King talked about how our technology has advanced further than our morality. And somehow we got to catch up with our technological gadgets. And I'll share one more of my favorite quotes, and that was from W.E.B. Du Bois, and that is, "Progress is ugly." And I have to say that to myself a lot because I want to make things happen like now. Diane and them know I want to do it now.
Yeah, you got the stuff always going in your head. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do?
Exactly.
The ADD.
And Diana had talked about a program that a lot of our Moms Demand Action volunteers do in local communities, getting in front of adult gun owners, and it's called Be Smart. And here's the acronym for the SMART part. So S, secure all guns in your home and vehicles. M, model responsible behavior around guns. A, ask about the presence of unsecured guns in other homes. So if you have children, it's different during COVID, right? There's not a lot of socialization, but when there is, if your child is going over to another, ask that person, like, do you own a gun? And if yes, how do you store that gun in your home? Do you want your child going to a neighbor's or friend's house that is not responsibly securing their guns? R in SMART, recognize the role of guns in suicide. And T, tell your peers to be smart. So adults talking to other adults that are gun owners about, well, what kind of safe do you have? Do you have your gun in a safe? And do you separate the ammo, the bullets from the gun? That's how you change culture, Gerald, right? Is people talking about that with each other.
That's correct. And being responsible.
Right.
My father taught me, first gun he gave me was a play gun. Then I went from a play gun to a BB gun.
Right.
Then he went and he taught me how to shoot a handgun. Then my grandfather taught me how to shoot a semi-automatic weapon. Then I went to the military and I learned how to use a whole bunch of stuff.
Right.
But in every phase of it, it was done responsibly.
Right.
And that's all we're saying. We're not saying we want you to get rid of your guns. We're saying we want you to be a responsible gun owner. We want you to put safety first. Put your family safety first. Put the community safety first. That's all we're asking.
And the Be Smart program, like we would pick the towns that we're going to table in, and there's certain towns that we know we will hit more resistance in. And just doing the tabling on Be Smart, it's not an aggressive front, I guess, to,
Yeah.
It's a softer approach, and they seem to understand it better than just coming out moms in every town. So it's a good thing to lead with, because people love their children, and it's a softer approach.
And we have
And
volunteers. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we have volunteers that do Be Smart trainings that are volunteers who are gun owners. Like,
Oh yeah.
volunteers that will say, I own a gun and I don't want anything to happen to my children or anybody in my home, and this is how I do it. So.
And what I want to do as an NAACP president is work with organizations like Moms, NAMI, and all the other organizations that are out there concerned about these issues. I want to celebrate life more, because I think that's what's missing. We need to enjoy being here. We need to enjoy spending time with each other and realize that we can do that without guns.
Yeah.
We don't have to have a good time and be around guns. We don't need to have that. I mean, I know somebody in this panel got some mean macaroni and cheese.
I think it's you. You watch us cook out every weekend, it's you.
But that's what I learned in the military, in an organization that was surrounded by weapons. And my organization, our motto was, humans are more important than hardware.
Yeah.
That's where we have to be. Celebrate each other, enjoy each other, and maybe we'll come to that day where we'll be like how it is in Japan, and maybe like it is in England, or maybe like how it is in Australia. But I think that having conversations like this, and then after we get out of this COVID-19 environment, I will volunteer with firing up that grill to bring us together, to make us, to give us the opportunity to enjoy life.
Oh, that is wonderful. Okay, everyone, you heard it here. Gerald Givens is going to fire up a grill at the next
Oh my gosh. You have to look at his pictures. You can find it for me.
Gerald, I'm 3 hours from Raleigh, and I'll drive 3 hours back and forth for that.
Oh, we can go there.
That's mutual, because that's what we need to start doing, you guys. We need to, and I say that sincerely because I went back to Detroit last year where I grew up. And instead of it being better, it's 10 times worse. It looks, I've been to war twice. In my neighborhood where I grew up, if I shared the pictures with you, you wouldn't believe it. Every single school that I went to is gone. Every elementary school, the middle school, the high school I went to, they're all gone. When I was there, these schools were brand new when I was attending them. That's just unimaginable. We have an opportunity to change how we live with each other and how we treat each other and how we're concerned with each other. And I'm proud of Moms Demand Action, NAMI, March for Our Lives, so many of these other groups that are putting gun violence front and center, whether it's homicide, whether it's suicide, or any other side you want to put to it.
Well, thank you, Gerald. I love all that you're saying. I really love your words about building community. It doesn't have to be about guns. There are many, many ways to build community, whether it's moms sitting around a kitchen table, starting a group because their adult children live with schizophrenia and they want more support on the topic of mental health and mental illness, or moms coming together against drunk drivers and the death toll that comes with that behavior, moms coming together for gun sense in America. There are so many good things that we need to do, and we're definitely all on the same team. We've got about 9 minutes, which, isn't too shabby. I want to make sure if any of you has a statement that you'd like to make before we close, that you have the opportunity.
I would like to say, and Tony Cope is an example of this, Peg, that everybody knows Tony on this call, is that Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America is mothers and others. It's moms, it's women that aren't mothers, it's men. We have our students demand action, so you don't have to be a mom to be part of coming together with us and doing prevention. And, I really will say everything that we're focused on is really about saving lives. When you look at the data on gun violence, and Gerald said this, that includes homicide, suicide, domestic violence related gun injuries, deaths, unintentional, where someone gets a gun and unintentionally shoots someone, like children in the home sometimes. It really is literally preventable. It's preventable. And so, but Gerald also said this, changing a culture takes time. And so sometimes it may feel like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, but at a point, you follow the data, the science on what really works. We're going to keep going forward, and we're going to get this done. And I really believe that, and I have hope for that.
I'm
gonna follow Debbie. I'm gonna follow Debbie and say hope is all about action.
Yeah.
One of our biggest heroes who just passed away, John Lewis. He was the classic example of hope and action. And if we want to be able to change things, we have to do hopeful things. We have to act like we want to, love each other. It's intentional. And as an NAACP president, I'm trying to build a 21st century branch that says it's about equity and opportunity. In Dr. King's time, it was about equality. Now it's about equity and opportunity. And we have to sit down and have some hard conversation with some hard answers.
And make a plan to enact them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what Debbie was saying, I agree with everything. And like Tony and Gerald and a couple of the other guys, there's a pin called "Man Enough to Be a Mom" that they get the honor of wearing. So it's
And I
not,
don't want to get too political, even though we're in very political times, but I would say, you know, we've touched on death caused by guns. We've touched on lack of mental health services. We've touched on the pandemic and how it's increasing those people that may be struggling, right? And, you know, people that are losing their jobs, the economy. And we have the right to vote, and we should vote, and we should vote for candidates that care about the same issues that we care about, and then budget accordingly and focus accordingly. And that is something else that we also focus on as well.
and hopefully next year we'll be able to
Absolutely.
get some of those bills passed off the Senate desk.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Hey, I keep a picture on my phone. I know y'all won't be able to see it, but I keep a picture on my phone when my daughter was 6 months old. Her mother had went to Saudi Arabia, and
Wow.
and I had to take care of this 6-month-old kid. And my daughter, I couldn't do her hair, so I would just put grease in it and just let it go into a fro and put a bow around it.
I was man enough to be a
And-
mom.
and our military base, they saw me. I was at a softball game and I was holding my daughter in my arm, and one of the base photographers took a picture of me holding my daughter like that, right? And she's eating a pretzel with this fro and a bow, and it's my favorite picture.
You send it to your wife.
Exactly. So us dads, we got to be in there too.
Right. That's right. That's very adorable. I love that picture, even though I haven't seen it. So, all right. Well, we're pretty much at the end of our time here, and I want to thank everyone for joining us in our virtual studio audience. I want to thank Gerald, Diana, and Debbie so much for your time and sharing your stories, sharing your eloquence, and really sharing a piece of yourselves. This has the feeling to me of a NAMI conversation because it is so personal and people are so passionate. And it means a lot that you spent your evening with us. So thank you for that.
I miss all you guys. Haven't seen you in a long time.
Absolutely. Secure your guns. If you need help, go see the doctor.
Tell someone.
Oh,
Exactly.
I love seeing the resource in here for some of the helpline numbers. Yes, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number, 1-800-273-8255, or text NAMI, N-A-M-I, at 741-741. That's so important.
I put a bunch of the
Okay.
Everytown statistic links. If people just go to Everytown stats, they can look up the COVID, ERPO with COVID, and several other topics we touched on as well. It's a great site.
Oh, and Diana, can you add, if any of the listeners are interested in learning more about Moms Demand Action, text READY to 64433. Yeah.
I've got presidential ones in my head too. I'm going back. I can scan over the suicide warning signs for teens as well, if it's something that you would like to keep, Peg, or
Yeah,
pass
absolutely. I'd love.
out. I like this
definitely.
little. I'm down to 2 copies, so I'll scan.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. We definitely an area where our missions overlap, one of many. And thank you again for all the gems and the resources that you've been sharing tonight. I want to encourage folks to come back next week. I will be in Myrtle Beach. I'll be missing everyone. And my boss, Executive Director Gary Kreitz, who is an ordained minister and an all-around wonderful person, will be interviewing several people on faith and mental health. So he'll have someone from the Jewish tradition, Muslim, and Christian, and it'll be a wonderful conversation. I hope you can come back for that. Another 90 minutes has flown by. This was such an interesting and wide-ranging conversation. Please, everyone, be well in the week ahead. Do what you need to do. Go where you need to go to be safe. Take care. Thanks for joining Thursdays with NAMI.
Hi, guys.
Go vote.
Thanks, Peg.
Go vote. Go vote.
Right. All right. That's a great note to end on. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Gerald. Bye.
Bye-bye.